Our exciting story begins with a sports video tutorial where a girl tells how to get rid of belly fat. She says that the body will be healthy if you do these exercises, and that in kendo sparring, you should never forget the basics. Continuing to explain, the girl says that the back should always be straight, and under no circumstances should you lose sight of your sparring partner. Later in this video tutorial, the trainer jumps over some fence, saying that she can easily overcome it. All this time, our main character was watching her through the phone screen. She suddenly started coughing, causing her to turn off the video and put her phone down on the bed. It was hard for her because the girl had been coughing up blood for several months, and she wondered why she couldn't just die already. But she decided that she had enough of the bad thoughts, so she decided to read a new web novel to cheer herself up. An advertisement appeared on the phone screen that this manhwa is recommended for reading for thrill seekers. The advertisement stated that this manhwa tells the story of handsome male characters and a fragile lady. The main character thought that the title of the manhwa sounded very interesting, so she decided to start reading it. But before she could click on the first chapter, she suddenly started coughing again, curling up into a ball on the bed. There were blood stains on her hand from where she had coughed up, and the girl thought how tired she was of all this. A system board with acceptance or refusal of reading the manhwa appeared on the phone screen. The main character's eyes widened, not understanding what it was, but the girl became very curious. And besides, it was free, so she decided to accept the invitation. The next second after accepting the invitation, she suddenly saw her reflection on the phone screen. Throwing the phone away, the girl thought that there was no point in reading the manhwa because she would die soon anyway. As she lay there staring at the ceiling, she began to think about how she dreamed of living in a healthy body. She wanted to live in a body so healthy that she wouldn't have to take a single pill. But the main character thought that today, for some reason, she felt more difficult than usual. She wondered if she was really going to die today. Suddenly, the girl felt like she was falling somewhere. And while she was falling, she made a wish that she would be lucky in her next life and live it in a healthy body. A system appeared before her eyes, informing her that she had agreed to participate in the search for the main character. The main character's eyes widened in shock as the system asked her if she would be able to find the main character. The system congratulates the girl on getting into the body of the main character, Roella Clemens. Roella thought she was delirious, and then realized that this was the event she had agreed to earlier. The system then informed Roella that she was given exactly 1 year to find the main character. As Roella read this, she didn't understand why exactly the year and what was going on here at all. The system asks her if she wanted to get a healthy body, and Roella didn't understand how it knew about it. It is reported that if Roella can find the protagonist within 1 year, she will be able to stay in this body forever. The system also says that the main character is weak, but this did not mean that her health was at 0. When Roella asked again if this was true, the system replied that it never lies. Roella realized that if she stayed in this body forever, she would be able to do what she did before her illness. Roella thought that according to canon, all men are in love with the main character of the novel, but then she thought that it would hardly be like that here. But Roella decided that she would do everything in her power to find the main character and then enjoy her life in a new body. The girl said that she had made a decision and that she would do it. But then Roella didn't yet know that in this novel, there were as many as 10 secondary characters, among whom you only needed to find the right one. Clutching her head with her hands, Roella didn't understand how she would be able to find the one she needed among them. The system says that it forgot to mention something. She announces that if Roella fails to find the main character within 1 year, she will die. The girl was shocked by what she read, and her body went numb from the overwhelming fear. Roella asked the system not to joke like that, but it told her that it was not a joke. After this, the system tells the girl that she is already dead anyway. That's why if she can't find the main character, she won't lose anything. Roella realized that this was true, but it was difficult for her to talk about life in such a way. The system added that tasks would also be given in free time, and the girl asked what kind of tasks. Her mission was not only to find the main character, but also to increase the interest of the secondary characters in her. Roella asked if she wouldn't complete the quest after she found the protagonist, but the system said that it was also necessary to raise the interest of others in it. The system explains that at first, all secondary characters will have 0 interest, but there may be exceptions when the interest of a minor character reaches 80%. Rowella will have the opportunity to check if a minor character is the main character. Also, if Rowella suddenly fails the mission, the system will fine her, and the girl gets furious. While she was yelling at the system, voices were heard outside the room. The girl realized that someone had come, and she didn't know what to do. She was confused. The system asks her if she is ready to start, because the countdown is about to begin. She didn't have time to do anything before the system announced the start of the quest and wished the girl good luck, and then disappeared. Someone outside asked him if he was sure he wasn't imagining things, to which he replied that he had heard something. Rowella covered her mouth with her hand to make as few sounds as possible and not give herself away. She began to look around in panic to see where she could hide. The girl decided that now she would hide and digest all the information she had just received. But suddenly, her leg accidentally gets stuck in the blanket and gets tangled, which prevents her from getting up properly. Rowella stumbles and falls to the floor, apparently making a lot of noise. The men outside looked at each other, and one of them was convinced that something was definitely going on there. One of them said that he clearly heard something, so they definitely needed to go inside. And after that, they both opened the door to the room, immediately looking around in search of the source of the noise. These men turned out to be Rowella's brothers, and one of them was named Evan Clemens, and the other was named Louis Clemens. Rowella forced a smile onto her face as Evan and Louis asked her when she woke up. The girl just said hello in confusion, not knowing what to say and thinking that she was in trouble. After some time, a doctor came to see Rowella to examine her after what happened. Duke Chase Clements asks him if Rowella is okay. The doctor tells him that she is completely healthy, and that it is even hard to believe that Rowella just slept for a whole year. Her brothers Evan and Louis muttered that no one doubted it. Chase turned to the boys and roughly ordered them to watch their language. Rowella was surprised that she had slept for a whole year, but what she found more interesting was the reaction of these three people. She was especially surprised by the reaction of that guy named Evan, who clearly did not look happy. When the Clemens brothers turned to look at her, the girl only smiled silently at them, but she couldn't understand why Evan had such an expression on his face, as if he was unhappy that she had recovered. Suddenly, a man named Chase took Rowella's hands, which she certainly didn't expect. Chase told the girl, looking into her eyes, that he thought she would never wake up. He asked Rowella if everything was okay with her body, and asked her to tell him at least something. As Rowella looked into Chase's eyes, she thought about how handsome he was, and how men like him only existed in manhwas. But she realized that this was far from important now, and that she urgently needed to answer something. She decided to pay him a compliment, so Rowella smiled and apologized for saying it on their first meeting, but called Chase very handsome. The doctor and brothers, standing behind him, stood silently petrified on the spot with their mouths open. But Rowella immediately noticed that the man's face became more serious. Chase said that Rowella was not at all well, to which the doctor replied that she was completely healthy. Rowella suddenly became scared when she saw that even sparks were flying from Chase's body due to anger. After this, the man asked the doctor why then Rowella did not remember him. In response to this, the frightened doctor stuttered, trying to answer something, but all the words were tangled on his tongue. Rowella guessed that the man was angry because she didn't remember him. Suddenly, the girl heard a familiar sound, realizing that a system had appeared here. The system told her that this man is her father, and he has an immeasurable interest in the main character. Rowella realized it was her dad, so she took his hand again and said she was starting to come to her senses. The doctor suggested that it was because Rowella had been sleeping for so long. Louis was surprised that Rowella called Chase dad, and Evan asked if she was in her right mind. Rowella again couldn't understand what she had done wrong, so she just smiled innocently in response. Chase tells her that since she slept for a long time, she might be a little out of it right now. As the man stroked her head, Rowella became sad and apologized, but called him dad again. But the father said that he should apologize, because she had just woken up, and he had made a scene here. The girl responded that she was completely fine, and that everything was fine. In response to this, the man only smiled briefly and said, "Thank God." After that, Rowella said hesitantly that she needed to be alone and collect her thoughts. Chase agreed with this and said that they would do so, and then called everyone out. But right at the door, the man stopped, turned to the girl, and thanked her for waking up. And Rowella had a memory in her head of someone thanking her for waking up, calling her Yoonji. Rowella thanked her father in return, although she didn't understand why. After everyone had left, Rowella thought about the memory that had suddenly popped into her head, but the girl tried to drive away the bad thoughts, turning her head. First, she entered the body of the main character of the novel she read before her death, and it seemed incredibly cool to her, because now her body became light as a feather. She jumped happily, remembering how the system had recently told her that the main character's body was weak. But Rowella understood that compared to her previous body, this was many times stronger. But suddenly, she thought about something, stopping jumping around the room. Rowella couldn't even figure out what kind of novel it was, because she only read the introduction and the first chapter. And if the girl had known that something like this would happen, she would have read many more chapters. A little later, Rowella's father was sitting in his office, drinking tea and thinking about something. He wondered out loud when everything had suddenly changed so much. Before Rowella passed out, she asked her father why he didn't come to her earlier, since he was her father. She was angry and said that since she was unable to activate her aura, everyone was pointing fingers at her and saying that she had no place in this family. Rowella grew up in an orphanage until she was 5 years old, but when she was 6 years old, she was taken into a family and became an adopted daughter. Cheese tried to treat her like his daughter, but Rowella was unhappy and pushed him away in every possible way. At that moment, due to the anger that had surged through the girl, she even broke the mug, and its fragments scattered across the floor. Laughing at the servant for every mistake was a routine matter for Rowella, and after her debut in high society, Rowella still failed to establish contact with other people. Chase's servant asked him if he should write a letter to the temple. The man refused and said that they should keep it a secret for a while, but he said that they would have to anticipate Luganette's reaction, and the servant agreed with this. Chase realized that Rowella had changed dramatically for some reason. The next day, the maids came to Rowella's room to tidy her up. One of the maids accidentally pulled the comb too hard, causing Rowella to feel pain and scream. The maid was also frightened by her mistake and immediately began to apologize, thinking that Rowella would now shout loudly at her. She even fell to her knees and began to ask for forgiveness, saying that she would not do it again. Rowella began to calm her down and tell her that when she brushed her hair, it often got tangled, and that was normal. Rowella convinces the maid that she is indeed okay and asks her to get up from the floor. The poor, frightened maid thanks Rowella in tears. Rowella guesses that the past Rowella treated the maids badly, which is why they were so scared. The maid asked if she would be fired, and Rowella said of course not. Rowella wiped a tear from the maid's face and said that they and many others had been looking after her while she slept all this time. With a gentle smile on her face, the girl asked the maid how she dared to kick them out and fire them. Another maid ran up to them and told Rowella that they were very glad that she had finally woken up. Rowella smiled at her and thanked them for everything. The maid asked her why she addressed them so formally and asked her to address them informally. Rowella replied that it was easier for her to use respectful speech, and the maids asked if they had done anything wrong. But in the end, Rowella gave in and agreed with them, saying that she would approach them informally. After this, the maid asked her to allow them to finish their preparations so that Rowella could have time for dinner with her father and brothers. Rowella smiled at them and agreed, saying that she was counting on them. After some time, Rowella was already sitting at the family table with her father and brothers. The whole table was filled with food that looked very tasty and attractive, and while the girl looked at the various dishes in front of her, she thought that she was in paradise. But the only thing that bothered her was that her brothers again looked somewhat dissatisfied. Her father said that they had not eaten together for a long time, so he told her to eat quickly before everything got cold. Eventually, everyone finally grabbed their cutlery and began to eat. Rowella didn't understand why it was so quiet at the table during family dinner. At that moment, she remembered how she always had lunch with her mom and dad when they were still alive. The girl remembered how she and her parents always chatted cheerfully at the table, without closing their mouths. Suddenly, the father noticed his daughter's strange mood and asked if she had an appetite. Rowella immediately perked up, coming back to reality, and said that she would eat everything now. When she tried a piece of meat, she was truly surprised at how delicious it was. For some reason, her father and brothers were surprised by her reaction to the food, especially when Rowella said how delicious it was. Rowella pulled other cups of food towards her, continuing to say how delicious it was. She gobbled one after another, filling her mouth with everything that came to hand. She thought that she hadn't tried such a delicious thing for a long time, because during her illness, she couldn't eat normally. Looking at his daughter, Chase told her to take her time and that he would ask her to make more. Rowella was delighted with this news and thanked her father with her mouth full. Louis quietly asks how such a young duchess can put so much in her mouth. The second brother said that it seemed that the true origin could not be hidden anyway. And at these words, the father slammed the table sharply. He angrily called out to Evan, ordering him to shut up immediately. Evan bit his lip, looking angrily down at the table. Chase noticed how Rowella became frightened by his scream and choked, starting to cough. He apologized to her for shouting so suddenly and asked if everything was okay. Rowella covers her mouth with her hand and replies that everything is fine, trying to quickly chew her food. After that, she smiled at Chase and asked him not to worry, calling him Dad again. Chase still can't get used to the fact that Rowella so calmly calls him Dad. They just laughed sweetly about the situation and continued to eat their breakfast calmly. Later, after finishing her lunch, Rowella goes outside, thinking that she was grateful to have the opportunity to eat such delicious food. But because of Evan's unpleasant look at her, she couldn't even swallow a bite. Soon a maid approached her and asked her with concern if she liked the food, noticing her mood. Rowella said she was a little tired due to possible overexertion. After her words, the maid suggested that she take a hot bath, and Rowella was surprised. The maid said that she would pour special salt into the bath that would quickly relieve fatigue. Rowella was pleased when the maid also noted that a bath would help lift her spirits. Already in the bathroom, the girl was convinced that the salt helped her to relax, and her muscles also relaxed. Only after such a nice hot bath did Rowella begin to feel sleepy. She decided to lie down in the water, submerging only her ears. Since childhood, she had very poor health. At 4 years old, she suffered from a heart defect, and at 13 from sarcoma. Because of this, she had to stay in the hospital almost from birth, and it seemed like going to school was out of the question. And when she reached 8 years old, she almost died. This happened because of the hands of her own mother, who began to strangle her when she came to her room. The father, who entered the room, froze in place when he saw and heard what was happening there. He immediately runs closer and starts yelling at his wife, asking what she is doing. The man asked his wife to come to her senses while he pulled her away from her daughter, but she only tried to say something. The woman asked how much longer they could hold out at this rate, since he worked all night long. But it was no use. She told him how long they would have to cover the hospital bills if their daughter was going to die soon anyway. As she listened to all this, tears rolled down her face, and she almost choked due to her mother's attempts to strangle her. But in reality, Rowella realized she was drowning when she realized she couldn't breathe underwater. The girl immediately emerged from the water, trying to catch her breath, because her breathing was ragged. She looked at her clean palm, already forgetting that here, in the game, she was not sick. Because she was sick and in poor health, not only she suffered, but also those around her. She thought that perhaps this body was her reward for those hard days. Rowella realizes that she must not miss this opportunity to stay in this body. But now she had no time to think about anything else, because now her main task was to survive. After taking a bath, the maids take care of Rowella's hair again, preparing to do some kind of hairstyle. The girl turned around and asked with a tired look if this was necessary. She said she just wanted to meet her brother, but the maids said it was the first time she would go to meet Louis in person. They say that they judge a woman by her clothes, not her mind, and that they absolutely need to take care of her appearance. After these words, they sprayed some perfume on the girl's hair to give it a pleasant smell. When the maids reported that they were finished, Rowella was surprised at how much prettier she looked. She realized that Rowella was now 17 years old, while the maids told her that she could now walk boldly. The girl thanked them with a smile on her face and left the room. As she approached the door, she thought that she had better make contact with Louis first, and then with Evan. She was sure that Louis would at least agree to talk to her, so she knocked on the door. Evan stood at the door, and Rowella was able to distinguish him because of the illuminated system above his head, showing his trust level. Rowella said she came because she had something to talk about with Louis. Moving closer to his sister, Evan leaned over her and asked why she came to his room. But the girl was confused and at a loss, because she was sure that this was Louis's room. Finally, Evan crossed his arms and said that he was listening to her. He chuckled and asked if she had come to his room to talk to him. Rowella immediately realized that Evan wanted to deceive her in this way and laugh at her, posing as Louis. She realized that Evan was taking advantage of the fact that he and Louis were twins, But thanks to the signs above their heads, Rowella could clearly see who was who, and this played into her hands. The girl boldly addresses her brother by name and says that she came to talk specifically with Lewis. Evan frowned and asked if she was sure it was Evan in front of him. Rowella was confused and told him that she just felt that it was him and not Lewis. Evan was surprised, asking again how she understood and felt it. When Evan thought she was telling the truth, the system showed that his sympathy increased by 1%. He realized that Rowella was the only one who could tell them apart, until the girl couldn't believe her eyes. She was surprised to see Evan's sudden increase in sympathy towards her. Evan doesn't understand why she's looking at him so strangely, but he doesn't have time to ask about it, because Rowella suddenly leans forward and attacks the guy with a strong hug. She thanked Evan, saying it was cool, although he didn't understand what she meant by asking what she was doing. He asked her to take her hands off him right now, while Rowella continued to say how wonderful it was. Rowella thought that so little time had passed, and she had already managed to raise someone's sympathy, although she had done nothing for it. At this moment, while the girl was hugging her stepbrother, Lewis, who heard a lot of unnecessary noise, enters the room. The shocked brother asks Evan what he is doing here, finding him in this position with Rowella. As soon as Evan saw his brother, he immediately pushed the girl away from him. Rowella fell right into Lewis's arms, looking to see who caught her. She thanked her brother for catching her and not letting her fall. While Evan looked at this sight strangely, he decided to leave as soon as possible. A joyful Rowella waved to him and said that they would see each other tomorrow. Now she needed to figure out how to make Lewis like her. Lewis, at that moment, looked strangely at his sister, trying to understand what was wrong with her. Already sitting on the sofa with a notebook in her hands, the girl asks her brother what kind of food he prefers. Lewis answered hesitantly that it was meat, and then asked why she was suddenly interested in that. Of course, Rowella didn't tell him the truth, so she said that she wanted to know more about her brother. Lewis was surprised when Rowella added that she had lost her memory and did not remember anything. Rowella asked him what his hobbies were, what he liked to do, and much more. Lewis wondered why Rowella was so interested in this. She replied that it was simple, and it was only because he was her brother. But Lewis responded by saying that even if she lost her memory, their communication would not change. She had assumed it, of course. But it seemed that Rella really didn't have the best relationship with her brothers. But Rowella couldn't leave it all just like that, because she had to go to the end. She asked if that was the reason he didn't want to answer her questions, and Louis said she would forget about it anyway. But Rowella suddenly screamed and said that she would never forget this and would remember everything without exception. Lewis was surprised and explained to her that she did not have to do this. But then the guy hit himself on the forehead because that wasn't what he wanted to say. Rowella coldly replied that she understood and that she would now go. Once she was standing up, she said that she wanted to improve her relationship with Lewis, but it seemed that she should have started with Evan. Lewis was surprised when he realized that he was the first one Rowella came to, and that it wasn't Evan. Rowella decided to say goodbye to him, but Lewis tried to stop her and asked why she decided to come to him. Rowella smiled, because that was exactly the question she wanted to hear. In response to his question, Rowella said with a smile that Lewis seemed friendlier to her. After these words, the system notified Rowella that Lewis's sympathy had increased by 1%. Lewis cleared his throat and asked Rowella to sit down, saying that it wouldn't take long to answer her questions. Rowella thought that if everything went as it was now, then finding the true one wouldn't be so difficult. Lewis talks about how he spends his free time in the room and trains here, to which Rowella replies that it's fucking awesome. She asked Lewis what he did when he couldn't train with the sword, and he said he slept, as it helped his muscles recover. And after telling his story, Lewis asks Rowella what the word oviget means. Realizing that such a word did not exist at that time, Rowella explained it as great admiration. The girl writes down in her notebook how Lewis developed an aura, and a little later began to practice fencing, which helped him become a real mid-level expert. Looking at her brother, Rowella thought that this would be a very profitable deal. She decided to quickly improve her relationship with Lewis in order to learn fencing. Also, according to Lewis, Evan is a top-level swordsmanship expert and is one step away from being a swordmaster. Lewis himself is a mid-level expert, meaning his rank is just below Evan's. And the only Dream Master in the Clemens family is Rowella's father, Chase Clemens. House Clemens has an army consisting of only the most outstanding and capable swordsmen. In the Roman Empire, where the emperor is the most important person, becoming a knight of the Imperial Guard was more difficult than getting a star from the sky. After all, once there, a person, even from the very bottom, but with decent skills, could receive the greatest power. But even with his level of skill, Louis had no plans to join the Imperial Guard. Rowella asked what he meant. He planned to focus on his studies, and Evan would join the Guard. Louis's face darkened, and he said that was true, and that Evan would most likely join the Guard. To enter the academy, one must be at least 20 years old, but Evan graduated early. Rowella couldn't understand why Louis suddenly became so gloomy. Louis said that he wasn't as smart as Evan, and that he came in second. He says that Evan was much more popular than him at the academy, although such talented people are hard to miss. The knights themselves also insisted that Evan become the next head of the family because he was much better than Louis. Rowella wondered why Louis suddenly started comparing herself to Evan. Trying to cheer him up, Rowella mentions that she heard that Louis also graduated from the academy, and that second place isn't that bad. She said it was even great that the twins were able to take first and second place. Rowella added that she felt very sorry for her brother's friends who entered the academy at the same time as him. She suggested that Louis had a hard time juggling everything, asking if he had found it difficult. The girl asked if he was very busy with work, to which Louis replied that he did not work that often. But Rowella replied that it was not about popularity, and the main goal in life was to find love. That's why Rowella told her brother that he shouldn't compare himself to Evan. Louis was surprised to hear Rowella say that even though they were twins, they were completely different people. After that, Rowella said that they would move on to the last question. She asked if she tried really hard and gave it her all, would brother Louis like her? Louis instantly blushed at these words and was confused. In the end, Louis never answered Rowella's last question. But at least Rowella managed to find out what feelings Louis has for his brother Evan. Louis admired Evan to some extent, but Rowella's pain in his place, she would have hated him. But Rowella wondered if Louis might have been pretending to her that this was the case. In any case, Rowella didn't understand why she was worried about others. She understood that she needed to find the true protagonist as soon as possible. And since Rowella was now healthy, she decided to write a list of what she wanted to achieve in the future. Firstly, she wrote that she wanted everything her heart desired. And secondly, that she could run without getting out of breath. After some time, Rowella finished writing a list of her wishes for the future. She wrote that she wanted to learn martial arts, get a pet, and learn yoga. But to do all this, Rowella first needs to find the main character. But suddenly, she became gloomy when she thought about what would happen if she couldn't find the main character. But the girl immediately shook her head to drive away bad thoughts. She firmly told herself that she would not give up and would go to the end. Some time passes after this, and the Clements family is again gathered around the dinner table. The brothers sitting next to each other were silent. Evan ate silently, and Louis glanced at Rowella. Chase, Rowella's father, also kept an eye on his daughter, seeing that she was eating less now. The girl looked surprisingly calm, not like she had been last time. The father decided to ask if she really had no appetite today, but Rowella denies this and says that the food on the table is incredibly delicious. After this, the man asked why she then ate so little and so slowly. Rowella said that she made a mistake yesterday when, having lost her memory, she also allowed etiquette to be violated. She said that even if she lost her memory, she was still the adopted daughter of the Clements family. And Rowella added that this makes her even more determined to be the person who is worthy of bearing the family name. After her words, a system suddenly appeared, which notified that the twins' sympathy for him had risen by another %. All the servants who were outside and heard this could not believe their ears. Evan wondered why Rowella was suddenly talking about this, and Louis wondered if this was some kind of plan of hers. Chase told Rowella that she had just had a wonderful idea. The girl thanked her father with a smile on her face, and while she sat there with a forced smile, she thought that she was already hungry. Taking the cutlery in her hands, Rowella hoped that now no one would distract her from eating. But suddenly her father, Chase, said that he had a gift for her. He said that since she had come up with such a wonderful idea, he wanted to reward her and asked what she wanted. The man promised, saying that he would fulfill any of her wishes. She said that she would like to learn how to run, so she needs sportswear for that. Rowella added that she just wanted to practice in front of the mansions, but her father interrupted her. He denied her this wish and said that he would do absolutely everything except this. Rowella was shocked by what she heard, thinking that then she would just sit locked up and not go anywhere. Her father explained to her that since she had lost her memory, it would be dangerous to let her leave the mansion alone. Rowella thought that his words sounded completely unconvincing, but in the end, Rowella agrees with him and says that she really shouldn't leave the mansion grounds now. The father agreed with her and asked her to think about her wish again. After some time, Rowella's father asks her to say hello to a certain woman. Chase introduces her as Isabella, who is the young princess of the Twill family. The man explained that Isabella would be teaching her. Rowella bowed to her, saying that it was a great honor for her to meet her, and then she introduced herself by name. Isabella bowed back and said that it was a great honor for her to meet her too. Rowella thought that Isabella looked very much like a polite and educated aristocrat. She was convinced that her education would be wonderful with such a teacher, even though Isabella had not yet begun to teach her. Father says that he and the head of the Twilly family have a pretty good friendly relationship, and it would be great if Rowella and Isabella became friends. After this, Chase gets up and says that he is leaving them alone to talk. Rowella smiled at her new teacher and told her that she was counting on her. Isabella asked in surprise if the rumors about Rowella losing her memory were true. But as soon as Rowella hesitated in her answer, Isabella immediately apologized for asking her such a tactless question. But Rowella, on the contrary, decided to ask if she had ever been close to Isabella. Isabella said that first she would tell Rowella about the history of the empire. She says that in the empire there are 4 ducal families that are the foundation. The Duchy of Clemence, which has power just below the imperial one, thanks to the military assistance it has. And the Duchy of Twilly was famous for its knowledge in science and medicine. The Duchy of Balera earned the trust of the empire by siding with the emperor during the founding of the Roman Empire. The Duchy of Hugel originally settled on fertile land and initially expanded its lands after. Among all the dukes, only the Clemence and Twilly families maintained very close relations with each other. This happened because during the founding of the state, the Twilly family was involved in the treatment of the Clemence family. Unlike normal healing magic, the Twilly family's healing magic has an exquisite jade hue. The Twilly family's healing magic became famous throughout the empire for its remarkable ability to change. The successful completion of the empire created a friendly relationship between the Clemence and Twilly families. After that, Isabella told Rowella, and she nodded understandingly. Thanks to Isabella's story, Rowella was able to roughly understand what the novel was about. The girl realized that it was good that she was able to understand it without even reading it. Isabella said their relationship was strained, but she thinks it was because Rowella rarely showed up for events. Rowella realized that she was originally a person with a bad character, but even so, Isabella kindly agreed to spend time with her, and she began to think that Isabella would indeed be a good teacher. Suddenly, Isabella said how quickly time had flown, and that it was time for her to go. Rowella agreed with her smilingly and thanked her for today. After that, she called Isabella a teacher, which made her noticeably embarrassed. Rowella immediately asked for forgiveness for any possible offense she might have caused her. Isabella, however, stuttered and replied that Rowella should not call her teacher. But Rowella responded that she was her teacher, and it would be logical for her to call her that way. After that, Rowella took Isabella by the hand and asked her to teach her everything properly. Isabella said she couldn't believe that Rowella actually called her teacher, and she thanked her for it. And then Isabella hesitated, stamping her feet as if she was about to say something. She asked Rowella if she had contacted Kyle yet, and the girl, surprised, asked who it was. Isabella said it was her brother, and that he was very worried about Lady Clemence. Rowella realized that she had another candidate for the title of main character. She asked if Lady Twilly had a younger brother, and Isabella confirmed that Kyle was her younger brother. Rowella's eyes lit up when she realized that this was indeed a new candidate for the role of the main character. She decided that she needed to meet him quickly to find out if Kyle was the main character. But suddenly, the girl remembered that she was forbidden to go outside. Noticing her changed expression, Isabella asked if everything was okay, and Rowella said that everything was fine. After this, Isabella said that with Rowella's permission, she would go, and they said goodbye. Then the girl went out into the corridor, closing the door behind her and leaning her back against it. At first, Isabella was very nervous when her father assigned her to study with Lady Clemence, because before, Rowella always pretended that she didn't notice Isabella. But today, Rowella was a completely different person, and Isabella thought that they could even become good friends. Then she remembered again how Rowella called her her teacher. After this moment, the action switches to a moment that happened 10 years ago. Isabella's father shouted at her, asking what was the point of wasting her time on such useless work. Pointing his finger at the girl, he said that her innate abilities were too insignificant. But Isabella, bursting into tears, answered her father that she wanted to become a teacher, to which he replied that he did not want to hear such nonsense. He asked if Isabella knew that in their family, everyone from generation to generation became a healer. Her father told her that she could not be an exception, and that she should not say anything like that to him again. But if Isabella suddenly spoke about her dream again, her father threatened to expel her from the family. The man shouted at his daughter, asking her to answer, and Isabella had to agree with him. Isabella remembers that day, the first time she shouted out loud what she really wanted to do. And after that, when her father did not want to listen to her, she decided to put an end to her dream forever and study medicine at the academy. But Isabella would never have thought that one day someone would call her a teacher, as happened today. After some time, Chase asks Rowella how her first lesson with Isabella went. An inspired Rowella said that Isabella was very elegant and she hoped that she could become just like Kona. Rowella tells how Isabella told her the history of the empire and their family's role in it. Rowella said with a smile that she was very happy to be a member of such a wonderful family. Chase guessed that the lesson went well, and Rowella confirmed this by saying that Isabella explained everything very well. Her father says that Isabella had long dreamed of joining the imperial order, which worried her father. Rowella is surprised by this and asks why he was worried. Chase replied that since Lady Twilly was also well-versed in medicine, she began studying it at the academy. But Rowella tells how Isabella looked very happy during the lesson. After that, she said that she hoped that medicine would be to Isabella's liking too. In the end, the father decides to ask Rowella what choice she would have made if she were in Isabella's place. Rowella answered wholeheartedly that she would choose what brings her joy. Chase smiled and asked why she answered that way. Rowella says that if a person chooses what he likes, then he will have great success in this field. She says that after this, a person wants to develop in this business more and more. The servant frankly said that Lady Rella had grown a lot. His father confirmed his words, saying that this was true. In fact, Rowella was thinking about asking her father for a quick trip outside, but she didn't want to ruin this pleasant, sweet atmosphere, thinking that now was not the best time. Finally, the girl stood up and said that it was time for her to go, bowing. The father said goodbye to her and asked her to return and have a good rest. Thus, when Rowella returns to the room, the sun has already disappeared behind the horizon and has been replaced by the moon. She thought that she would be able to do what she liked only after she was sure that she would survive here. The girl realized that she needed to find the main character as soon as possible, but Rowella didn't even remember Kyle's face. And besides, she wasn't allowed to go outside. Suddenly, a system appeared in front of Rowella, notifying her of a new mission. The system told her that they had not noticed her desire to find a true hero, so she could not sit still. But Rowella, angry, said that the system knew perfectly well that she was not allowed to go outside. The system says that everything depends only on itself, and Rowella asked what kind of mission awaits her. Her first mission was to get out of the mansion and reach the fence in the backyard. Rowella was surprised that this had to be done right now, since she was in her pajamas. Sistema said that she didn't care how she was going to get there, and that if she didn't complete the mission, she would get a fine. And after that, the system announced the countdown. When Rowella realized she had no time to hesitate, she ran out of her room. The girl ran up the stairs and understood that she could not fail her first mission. She knew that she needed to find the main character as soon as possible. But Rowella was confused because she didn't know where the door to the outside was. In the end, Rowella simply decided to run down the hallway until she saw the door. But suddenly, she stopped abruptly, already sweating from running, wondering if this door even existed. She thought that if she was not on this side, then it meant that she must be on the other. At that moment, the girl saw a servant standing in the corridor, thinking that he was her savior. Noticing Rowella, the man was surprised and wanted to ask what she was doing here so late. After clearing his throat, the servant asked Rella why she had come here so late. Grabbing the man by the shoulders, Rowella cried out that it didn't matter now. She asked where the door to the backyard was, and the servant pointed her in the direction. Pointing to one wooden door, he said it led to the backyard. Rowella thanked him and immediately rushed there, when the servant did not even have time to ask why she needed to go to the backyard. The system showed that there were 4 minutes and 57 seconds left until the end of the mission. Rowella decided to speed up, not understanding when she had managed to waste so much time. When the girl reached the door, she tried to open it, but it barely gave in. But after several attempts to do so, the door finally opened, and Rowella found herself outside. She was surprised when she looked around the backyard, because it was not what she imagined it to be. Rowella didn't understand why the backyard was so far away. She clutched some of her pajamas in her hands to make it more comfortable. The girl understood that now she would have to run as fast as she could to make it in time. Taking a deep breath, Rowella rushed towards the fence. She ran as fast as she could until the system announced that there were 32 seconds left until the end of the mission. Rowella saw that the fence was already very close, and she only had a little bit left. Finally, the girl runs to the fence and touches it with her hand when the time in the system runs out. The girl couldn't understand whether she had passed the mission or failed. She looked at the system, which showed a loading icon. A little later, the system notified Rowella that the mission had been completed. Breathing a sigh of relief, Rowella was happy that she had been able to complete the mission. At that moment, a man sitting on a large tree branch kept looking at her. After completing the mission, Rowella was offered to collect the reward by choosing one of 3 keys. She decided that since this mission was the first, she would take the first key. The system notified that Rowella had made her choice, taking the first key, and then Rowella saw that she received +5 dexterity as a reward. The system said that she was unlucky, because it was unlikely that dexterity would help Rowella find the main character. The system also showed the girl her entire characteristics, and Rowella was surprised. The man who was watching Rowella didn't understand what she was trying to see in the air. He grinned as if an interesting plan had formed in his head. The man jumps abruptly from the tree and lands on the ground. Rowella flinched, saying he scared her, and then asked who it was. The unfamiliar man came closer to her, stopping half a meter away. Calling her affectionately as Ellie, he asked if she, having lost her memory, had really forgotten about him. The man said it was very sad, putting his hand on Rowella's face. Rowella was surprised and asked what kind of nickname he gave her while the man was talking about how she had changed. He thought that Rowella had been too strict around him before, and now he couldn't even think about how radiant Rowella's smile really was. After some time, the man moved away from the girl and frowned. He couldn't understand why Rowella went out into the street looking so embarrassing. He turned his head the other way, thinking that she might at least be wearing something, despite the fact that it was a backwoods. The system appeared before Rowella's eyes again, asking her to focus on it. The system told Rowella that her skills were now like pathetic trash. The system also notified that if Rowella wanted to check her statistics, she needed to say her name and then it would appear. Rowella learned from the system that the higher her skills and abilities, the easier she would be able to complete missions. The system warned the girl that it was all interconnected and that it was important. Rowella was surprised and tensed when she read this, but she didn't understand what exactly the system meant. But the system never answered her and disappeared, and the girl didn't even have time to ask anything. After that, she accidentally tripped and began to fall without realizing it. But the man who was nearby immediately reacted to this and grabbed Rowella by the waist, pulling her towards him. Rowella came back to reality, remembering that the man was still here. She felt terribly awkward, but nevertheless she thanked him. Rowella made a strange face, as if she felt some kind of discomfort. The man asked what happened and if she was hurt. The girl waved her hands in confusion and replied that she was fine. By this time, she had already decided to return back to the mansion, but the man suddenly picked her up in his arms and asked where she was going. Rowella screamed loudly and was surprised at how high she was now. And suddenly, the girl began to think that the system had organized this mission precisely because of this man. But Rowella couldn't understand why the man didn't have any information about him above his head. The man carried Rowella to another place and sat her down on the grass under a tree. Rowella, looking at him, thought that he might not be the new candidate for the role of the main character. The man threw his jacket in her direction and asked her to put it on, even though she was on the grounds of her mansion. He said that such a lady should not be on the street dressed like that, even in front of her friends. And after that, the man's ears turned very red as soon as he said this. Rowella smiled sweetly at him and thanked him for the jacket. The man, adjusting his bangs, said that there was something to thank him for. After that, he sat down next to Rowella and touched her knee with his hand. He carefully began to lift her pajama dress higher to look at the wounds, but perceiving this gesture differently, Rowella became frightened and asked what he was doing. The man covered her face with his jacket and asked her not to shout, because they would get into trouble if someone heard them. Rowella wondered what this pervert was planning to do, not believing that he was a candidate for the role of the main character. She pulled his hand away from her and asked him to move away from her. Angry and scared, the girl asked why he had just done that. She added that even if a man has not seen her for a long time, she is still a princess, and this is her home. Rowella thought that this man really was some kind of pervert. Rowella said she needed to go to the police, and the man asked her what nonsense she was talking about. The girl began to say that she would call Duke Chase, reminding him that he was a master of the sword. But the man, ignoring her words, sat down next to her, grabbing her by the chin and again addressing her as Ellie. The man asked the girl in a serious tone if she was afraid of him, and while the lady looked at him in confusion, the man patiently waited for her answer. And suddenly, the man unexpectedly began to laugh, stroking the girl on the head. Rowella became even more confused, not understanding what had happened to him. She screamed that he, the pervert, was up to his tricks again, and he jokingly confirmed it. The man, calling himself her friend, said he was only trying to heal her wounds. Rowella was surprised and asked what wounds he was talking about, and the man pointed to her legs. After that, the man carefully brought his palm to the wounds on Rowella's legs, and before she even had time to realize anything, the wounds disappeared. The girl was surprised when she saw that there were no more wounds and that her leg no longer hurt. Rowella realized how cool it is to live with magic, and that this world is just wonderful. She said she now feels lighter when she says how awesome it is. In response to this, the man grinned and said that she was no longer a little child. Taking the man's hands, Rowella thanked him for healing her. The man said she kept addressing him too formally. After that, he added that he could not even think that she could forget about him. At that moment, Rowella notices his name above his head and his sympathy scale, which reached 20. And when Rowella read his name, she realized that this was the same Kyle Twilly that Isabella had spoken of. The girl immediately realized that this was the same Kyle, who was Isabella's younger brother. Rowella said out loud that she had almost won, and Kyle asked what she was mumbling. To make it more believable, Rowella decided to ask him if he really was Kyle Twilly. Kyle was surprised that she still remembered him, and that she had not forgotten him, and Rowella thought that he was in love with her. So the girl says that she would like to ask him something. Pointing her finger at Kyle, Rowella asked if he really liked her. There was an awkward silence between them after that because Kyle didn't answer. He scratches the back of his head awkwardly and shifts in place, not knowing what words to choose to answer. At this point, Rowella notices how the system notifies her that there was a special relationship between her and Kyle because they had known each other for 10 years. Kyle jokingly said that he himself didn't know that Rowella liked him, even though they had known each other for so long. Rowella immediately wanted to sink into the ground from shame, cursing the system that could not tell her about this earlier. The girl couldn't believe what she had done. She also couldn't understand why Kyle was talking to her like that when she had a 20% sympathy level. Rowella was ready to tear her hair out from how shameful this was. The only positive she saw from all of this was that she was able to learn a lot of new information about Kyle. Kyle Twilly and Rowella Clemens are longtime childhood friends. The real Rowella, though, was very rude to her servants and other people. But around Kyle, the girl always behaved differently. They did not want to become the subject of gossip in high society. That's why they decided to meet at night in the backyard of Rowella's mansion, where no one could see them. The fact that Rowella has woken up is not officially known to anyone except the Twilly family. But, nevertheless, Rowella still does not understand why she cannot go outside the mansion. She doesn't know why her father is keeping the fact that she woke up a secret. But now, Rowella understood that it didn't matter, because she needed to increase sympathy towards herself. Kyle's sympathy scale didn't change from the very beginning of their meeting until the very end. While in the body of Jung Eun-jae, she lay in one place for about 17 years, as she was ill. While the girl was lost in thought, a maid knocked on her room door, asking if she was awake. Rowella replied that yes, and that she could come in. But Rowella also wondered if she couldn't ask someone else about this. The girl realized that she could ask this advice on how to please someone, from someone. No sooner had the maid named Penny entered the lady's room than she immediately called her. The maid was surprised and even scared when Rowella quickly ran towards her across the room. She ran up to the girl and said that there was something she wanted to ask her. Without thinking twice, Rowella immediately asks the maid what she needs to do to please someone. The maid suggested that you could naturally like a person by seeing him often and spending time with him. Rowella listened to her attentively, agreeing with her every word. She has already gone further, convinced that if you see a person more often, then sympathy will rise faster. The maid suddenly thought that her mistress had fallen in love with someone, and at that moment, Rowella turned to her. She asked the maid where her brother Louis was, thinking she should start with the easiest target. The maid said that Louis was currently training at the training ground, so Rowella went there. A little later, the girl finds her brother training with a sword. Louis was practicing fighting with a sword in his hands, looking quite focused. Rowella, having observed him, now understood how his sword training actually went. She was surprised to see that even the sky turned red from Louis's swings. Rowella caught herself thinking that she was in a movie as she watched him train. More often than not, a small drop of kindness can touch people's hearts, so Rowella didn't come empty-handed. She thought that sympathy could rise not only due to romantic feelings. With these thoughts, the girl came closer to her brother and called him. But Louis, too engrossed in his training, did not immediately realize that it was his sister. He suddenly turned around sharply and swung his sword, thinking that he needed to defend himself. Rowella didn't even have time to react to this, because everything happened too close. The very next second, a sharp sword blade left a cut on her neck. It was only now that Louis realized that Rowella was standing in front of him, and he asked in shock what she was doing here. His hands began to shake, and Rowella said she had brought him some water, thinking he might want to drink it after his workout. As drops of blood dripped onto the asphalt, the girl said that she did not want to interfere with his training. She looked at Louis, who was already blurry in her vision, and suddenly she realized that she was falling. Looking at her bloody palm, Rowella wasn't surprised, because she had been hit by an expert. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, Louis ran up to her in fear. After this, Rowella was urgently carried to the mansion, and her neck was bandaged. While the father looked at his daughter in rage, the brothers stood silently to the side. Chase yelled at Louis, asking how dare he call himself a swordsman when he was swinging his sword left and right. Louis said he warned everyone not to go in there as he would be training. Chase replied that even if that was the case, how could he not notice Rowella's arrival? Evan says that in this case, the responsibility lies with Rowella, who showed up there unannounced. He adds that it was Rowella who disobeyed her brother's request not to go there, because he doesn't think the maids didn't warn her. At that moment, they were distracted by a knock on the door, where the maid said that Kyle had arrived here and he wanted to see the Duke. Chase told the maid to invite him here. After this, a frightened Kyle, covered in 3 layers, appears in the doorway of the room. Cal slowly approached the bed with Rowella lying on it. Chase thanked Kyle for coming, but Kyle, in turn, told him that he should be thanking him for the opportunity to cure Rowella. Looking at the unconscious Rowella with pity, Kyle said that he already knew all the details. He said that if even a little bit of the sword's mana penetrated the skin, it would be impossible to heal the wound on the neck. Kyle thought about Rowella's brothers, remembering how they had bullied her throughout her childhood. Eventually, Kyle told the Duke that before he could begin the treatment, everyone except Chase had to leave the room. After this statement, the Clements brothers leave and return to their room. Louis remained standing at the door, and Evan asked him why he was standing there like a statue. Louis asked worriedly if everything would be okay with Rowella, and if Kyle would be able to cure her. Evan reassures his brother that even if there is a scar on her neck, there is no crazy family that would not want to take Rowella as a bride because of this. Louis decided to tell that after Rowella woke up a year later, she came to his room. He tells Evan about how Rowella asked him if he could like her if she tried. He adds that during training, she came to him to bring him water because she was worried that he would be thirsty. But Louis asked her brother if he knew what he was thinking until Rowella told him about it. Louis clutched his head and quietly said that he seemed to feel something for Rowella now. Louis realizes that his father was right when he said that a swordsman must always be sensitive and recognize all sounds. But Louis couldn't even comprehend how it happened that while swinging his sword, he didn't notice Rowella in front of him. He remembered that only Rowella calls him brother in the whole family. Evan asked Louis if he really thought Rowella wanted to feel sorry for him, then said she would never do that. And after that, he asks Louis why he had such thoughts, if he already knew it. Lewis suddenly mentions that he and Evan are twins, born at the same time. But when they started training as children, Lewis was able to become a mid-level expert, and Evan was able to become a top-level swordsmanship expert, and the difference in their swordsmanship was only one level. But, one way or another, it was this that brought about many changes in their lives. At first, Evan walked side by side with Lewis, but then, having overtaken him, he left him far behind. Lewis realized that he would forever be left behind his brother and alone, and bad thoughts about how worthless he was began to enter his head. Not only does Lewis feel like an inferior brother next to Evan, but now Rowella has started to feel sorry for him. He recalled how his sister had sincerely tried to encourage him, but Lewis did not understand what he, in turn, was doing. After that, he fell silent, and Evan asked why he didn't continue. Lewis said he was lost in his thoughts and had many things on his mind, so he became silent. Evan coldly replied that he understood everything, and after that, he wanted to leave, turning around. But Lewis suddenly said that even if he told Evan everything, he still would never be able to understand him. After these words, Evan stopped and said that if he were in his place, he would most likely intentionally hit Rowella with his sword. He added that he would have done the same if she had come to him during training, and also said that he didn't like Rowella. Lewis was furious when he heard his words and wanted to tell him that this was not right, but his brother interrupted him. Evan told him that Lewis himself would never have done such a thing. He explains this by saying that Lewis is not the type of person who is capable of harming others. Evan says that, unlike himself, Lewis is a good person. When mentioning Kyle, Evan says that he wouldn't have driven them away if there had been no other way to heal the wound without a scar. Finally, Evan asked Lewis to stop torturing himself and thinking about all sorts of nonsense. After that, he turned around again and said he was leaving. This time for sure. After he left, Lewis began to think that he too could not be called a good person. After Evan and Lewis left the room, Kyle walked up to Rowella and said he would untie her bandage. He said the wound was much deeper than he thought, suggesting that the sword had pierced his neck much further. Kyle tells Rowella's father that he will be using a treatment method that is not made public. Chase asked if it would be dangerous to use such a method on Rowella, and Kyle said he couldn't guarantee it. He plans to heal the sword's mana from the wound and infuse his own healing mana into it instead. Kyle explains that the wound will disappear from the inside, and his father says that this is the first time he has heard of such a treatment method. Kyle also says that this can only be done if the person is good at managing the healing methods, which he is. However, Kyle warns that this method will greatly reveal the health of his body, and so he asked the Duke to keep this treatment a secret. Chase began to wonder if Kyle's words were true. Then he really was capable of healing even the most severe wounds. He knows that if this method were to come to light, people would start tormenting Kyle left and right, not allowing him to live in peace. And suddenly, Chase thought that it would be good if Kyle married Rowella. Taking the girl's hand, Kyle said that he would begin to heal the wound. The father returned to reality, not understanding what strange thoughts were haunting him. Kyle closed his eyes, trying to focus on healing. As the healing process began, a colored aura appeared around Kyle and Rowell. Kyle opened his eyes, watching as the wound on his neck began to disappear after using his method. When the wound had completely disappeared, leaving not even a scar, Kyle realized that everything had worked. Chase thanked Kyle for his help and asked if he was okay, and he replied that he was fine. Kyle made it clear that others must not know that such a deep wound had healed so quickly, so Rowella must wear the bandage around her neck for a while longer. The father thanked Kyle again and said that he didn't know what he would do without him. As Kyle was about to leave, he remembered the words he had spoken to his brothers when he first came here. He hoped that the brothers understood that this was his warning for both of them not to lay a finger on Rowella again. While Kyle was riding in the carriage, a servant asked him if he had overdone it. The servant says that even though he didn't see Rowella's wound, he thinks that a normal healing technique would have been enough. Kyle said that Rowella could have been left with a scar, and then he would have had to take full responsibility. After this, Kyle said that he couldn't watch other people suffer. He sighed, saying that he didn't like the Clements twins because they always wanted to pick on Rowella. At this moment, the servant carefully asked the young Duke if he liked Rowella. Kyle said that this couldn't be, because Rowella was just his childhood friend. He added that he simply felt sorry that such a young girl was being bullied like a kitten. Besides, Kyle said that Rowella only has him, so he has to take care of her and protect her. He thought about it and estimated that her recovery would take about 4 days. Kyle thought about how he wanted to see her again and see her sweet smile. 3 days later, Evan stood in front of the closed doors leading to Rowella's room. He wondered if they had really cured Rowella, since 3 days had already passed. Evan told Lewis that she would wake up before he could blink, but that was not the case. In the end, Evan decided to take one look at Rowella and then leave. But it seemed strange to him that he was the only one going to enter the lady's room. Evan doesn't understand what he's even doing now. He wondered what it mattered to him whether Rowella woke up or not. But at that moment, Evan heard Rowella start coughing. He immediately threw open the door and rushed into the room, seeing that Rowella was still lying there and coughing. Running to his sister in a panic, Evan asks Rowella what happened. Rowella said between coughs that she was choking, trying to grab her neck with her hands. Evan grabbed her hands to stop her from doing so and continued to beg the girl to wake up. Tears began to flow from Rowella's eyes as she repeated that she didn't want to die. While Evan held her hands, Rowella called out to her mother for help. Evan was shocked when he heard this, and he was even confused. When he realized that Rowella had calmed down, he gently let go of her hands. Rowella continued to mutter for him not to leave her and not to go away. But Evan thought it was just her dream, so he let go of her hand. He actually started to leave the room, but Rowella grabbed his sleeve and again asked him not to leave, calling him Mom. Evan felt uneasy about this and smiled sadly. Evan eventually decided to stay, so he pulled a chair up to the bed and sat next to Rowella. So Evan sat and watched Rowella until dawn. Later, the girl finally woke up and opened her eyes, hearing the voices of the maids. She sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes and trying to come to her senses. The worried maids immediately hovered over her, saying that they were very worried about her. One of the maids says that Rowella was unconscious for 4 whole days. Penny's maid added that Kyle told them that her wound would heal quickly, so she had nothing to worry about. She also said that Rowella would need to wear a bandage around her neck for a while. Then Rowella realized why she had that nightmare where she was being strangled. She sighed, thinking that this was all she needed. However, the girl continued to feel someone's phantom on her hand. She was surprised and looked at the empty chair next to her. As she thought about it, Rowella remembered how she had actually felt someone's hand in her dream. Penny worriedly asked Rowella if she was okay when she saw her frowning face. While Rowella was saying that everything was fine, she thought that her dad was probably sitting here. Turning to the maids, Rowella asked them to tell her father that she had already woken up. When the maids left and Rowella was left alone in the room, she said her name so that the system would show her her characteristics. Rowella was very surprised when she saw that her magic power had increased. She was glad that even while lying down, she could increase her magical power stats. But before the girl could rejoice enough, the system notified her of a new mission. The mission states that Rowella must make Lewis her fencing teacher. Rowella began to get indignant because she had just woken up and was already given a mission. At that moment, time appeared in the system, and Rowella had only an hour to complete the mission. Rowella became even more angry because the system didn't even let her rest properly. In fact, Rowella was surprised that the system gave her such a mission to make Lewis her teacher. From what Rowella heard, after the day Lewis struck her with the sword, he locked himself in his room and never came out again. There was no response after she knocked on the door, and Rowella thought Lewis hadn't heard. She decided to shout louder, saying that she, Rowella, was here. But even after that, there was complete silence on the other side of the door. Rowella became worried, not understanding why Lewis did not open his door to her. When she looked at the board and saw that time was ticking, she realized that she couldn't waste time, and she started pounding on the door. And while she was screaming, trying to call her brother, a servant appeared behind her who had come to the noise. Rowella asks the man if Lewis is in his room now. The servant confirmed that Lewis was in the room, and Rowella became even more puzzled as to why he did not open the door for her. The servant said that after Lewis locked himself in his room, he refused to come out or even eat. Rowella thought that Lewis decided to do this because of the day he hurt her. But the girl understands that she has absolutely no time to wait for Lewis to open the door. By this point, the time had already reached 36 minutes. Rowella looked at the door, and suddenly a perfect plan, as it seemed to her, appeared in her head. She asked the servant to come closer to her because she wanted to tell him something. As the man leaned towards her, Rowella whispered her plan into his ear. The servant was immediately at a loss, but Rowella said that the plan must be carried out right now. After this, the girl immediately grabbed her neck and turned on her acting. She started screaming and saying how her throat hurt. Lewis reacted instantly to the scream and woke up, recognizing Roella's voice. The servant joined in her plan and began to play along, shouting that it was a pity that there was no one nearby who could help. The man said that he would get up right away and run to call for help. But just at that moment, a worried Lewis runs out of the room in panic and asks what happened. Roella immediately realized that her brilliant plan had worked. When Lewis came out, he saw a servant next to the girl, not understanding what was happening. Roella suddenly perked up and said that she seemed to be out of pain. Lewis, clutching his head, asked if she was serious and sighed. After this, the girl deftly slipped under her brother's arm and entered his room. She looked around and said that Lewis's room was even cleaner than her own. Later, Roella tried to understand how Lewis's sympathy had jumped from 1% to 12%. Roella didn't know what could have happened while she was unconscious. She confronted Lewis about why he didn't come to her immediately when she woke up. She began to question why he had locked himself in his room and refused to eat, like a small child who needed to be calmed down. Lewis was confused and tried to answer something, but all the words were tangled on his tongue. He said quietly that he thought Roella wouldn't want to see him because of what he did to her. But Roella was surprised that he took her words so seriously, because she was just joking. Right now, Lewis looked like a puppy being scolded by his own owner. Roella laughed and told her brother it was a joke. But still, she said that she was really sad because Lewis didn't come to her. She took his hand in hers and said that he had done nothing wrong, because he had not intentionally harmed her. At this point, Lewis remembers Evan's words, who told him that he would never do such a thing. Roella asked Lewis why he looked so guilty if it was an accident. She took off her bandage from her neck and asked him to look at it so that he could make sure that she was really okay. Lewis froze in place as he looked at his sister and saw that there was not a single mark of his sword on her neck. Roella said with a smile that Kyle treated her well and didn't even leave a scar. The girl was about to say something to her, but something stopped her. She suddenly saw a single teardrop fall onto Lewis's pants. Lewis suddenly burst into tears, and the tears slowly rolled down his red face. But it seems that Lewis himself did not realize that he had started crying, so he was surprised. Lewis said it was amazing, and added that he was glad that Roella's wound had healed without leaving a scar. He suddenly hesitated because he wanted to say something to Roella. He thanked her for waking up and said he was glad she was okay. After these words, Lewis also asked his sister for forgiveness for what happened. Roella asked if he really wanted to apologize, even if it was a mistake. And then the girl asked him if he would mind fulfilling one of her requests. Lewis looked at her thoughtfully, asking what this request was. She said with a smile that she wanted to learn fencing from brother Lewis. At this moment, Lewis looked at her suspiciously and tensed up. Roella saw a system appear above his head. She saw Lewis's sympathy increase by another 2%, and she wondered why so quickly. Lewis said seriously that she should contact Evan about anything related to the sword. He told her to ask him to be her teacher, not him. But Roella refused and said that she wanted Lewis to be her teacher because she felt that he would be much better. At that moment, Lewis's sympathy rose from 2% to 3%, and Roella thought he was genuinely happy to hear her words. Roella guessed that Lewis simply wouldn't be able to resist her compliments. At this point, the time on the system display was already showing 19 minutes. The girl understood that if Lewis refused her, the mission would fail. She understood that she couldn't lose, so she had to act. Roella confessed to Lewis that when she looks at his sword skills, she becomes very jealous. Roella pretended to cry and said that everyone around her was saying that she couldn't even control a dagger. Noticing the tears on his sister's face, Lewis tensed up and asked what was wrong. Roella replied that even though she couldn't control magic, she wanted to know at least the basics. After this, she asked if Lewis would be her mentor, while he tells her that she is too close to him. Roella made it stern and clear that she didn't want to see anyone else as a teacher except him. At that moment, Lewis's sympathy increased by 2%, and Roella already wanted him to just agree as soon as possible. Lewis had to think for a moment to make his decision, but he eventually agreed. He justified his decision by saying that because of him, Roella got hurt, so he couldn't refuse her. Lewis told her that, well, he would teach her to fence. The system notified that the mission was completed and offered Roella to choose one of 3 keys. The girl rushed to her brother with hugs and thanked him, saying that she would try very hard. While Lewis was telling her to move away, Rowella was trying to reach for the key. Because she pressed herself so tightly against Lewis, she could feel how hot he was. In addition to the 3 golden keys, Rowella also received a paper potion. She was already thinking about how she would get other rewards on the next mission. At that moment, right down the corridor, the girl noticed Lewis walking towards her. But then, taking a step closer, she realized it wasn't Lewis, but Evan. Rowella was suddenly surprised that Lewis and Evan had always been twins, but to her they were very different. And at that moment, she suddenly noticed Evan's sympathy percentages had increased. This made her scream, and Evan asked what she was doing. Rowella was literally stunned when she saw that Evan's sympathy percentage had risen by a whole 7%. So, Rowella decided to ask Evan if he was really worried about her too. Evan, crossing his arms over his chest, replied that this was complete nonsense. Evan added that he had no need to worry, because she came to the training ground on her own. After that, Evan seriously said that Rowella should know that she doesn't fit into their family. He says that no matter how stupid and frivolous she is, she must understand this. Before Rowella woke up, there was silence, but now everything is noisy because of her. After giving her a final warning, Evan told her to sit quietly and do nothing. He says that Rowella shouldn't act like a bolt from the blue, and after that, Evan added that if she did this, his sword would go across his throat. Evan explains that if Rowella wants to survive here, her movements must be quieter than a dead rat. As Rowella walked past him, Evan also said that she was really annoying him right now. The girl knew that Evan hated her, but she didn't think it was to this extent. Rowella thought that here, in this world, she wanted to live like in a fairy tale, but in the end, she only suffers. But Rowella knows she can't cry because she didn't do anything wrong. She decided that she would not endure it any longer, because she really had something to say. She called out to her brother, and Evan turned around, asking what she wanted. Clenching her hands into fists, the girl said venomously that whether she was right for this family or not was not up to him to decide. No matter what anyone says, she is Rowella Clements, and she doesn't care what he thinks about her, because she will still be here. Rowella told Evan that if he was unhappy about something, he should leave on his own. Evan got angry and was about to say something, but his sister interrupted him. She shouted back at him that they were a family one way or another. Rowella realizes that Evan knows nothing about her real life. After all, Evan, unlike her, was born completely healthy. Evan, unlike Rowella, was always able to live a full life. For her, happiness was that a person could do whatever he wanted. But Rowella could never do what she wanted, and all she could do was wait for her time. Rowella showed Evan that she knew what she was missing, and she knew it better than anyone else. That's why Rowella will try her best to stay here. And the girl adds that she will also do everything possible to please Evan. Evan freezes in shock. Not understanding what Rowella means, Rowella proudly said out loud that it was because she had actually been reborn. Evan was confused about what Rowella was saying, so he asked her what she was talking about. Rowella replied that she didn't care whether Evan liked her or not, but she would definitely become a part of this house. After these words, the girl turned around and was about to leave. But Evan's words about how he hated her still played in her head. Unable to bear it any longer, Rowella turns around again and returns to her brother as he asks her what else she wants to say. Rowella approached him and said that she would train hard and go to the end, no matter what. She asked Evan if he had any idea how blessed he was to be healthy and able to do whatever he wanted. As tears welled up in her eyes again, Rowella said that she personally was very grateful for this. He says that when a person is sick, he is not able to live, and he is forced to endure it because he can do nothing else. And the girl said that she could endure pain better than anyone else. She tells Evan that no matter how much he threatens her, she will not act like a dead mouse. After this, Rowella finally turned around and said that she was very disappointed in Evan. When his sister left, Evan was left standing alone in the empty hallway. He was genuinely surprised by the way Rowella said she was disappointed in him. Evan couldn't understand why these words suddenly affected him so much. He remembered what Rowella had just said, that she was able to bear pain well. And then Evan remembered how the girl suffered while she lay unconscious in bed. However, by the time Evan was returning to his room, his affection level for Rowella had increased by 2%. Already at night in her room, Rowella grabs her hair with her hands and asks herself what she has done. Rowella was shocked at how she acted towards the person with the lowest sympathy level. She guessed that Evan's sympathy might have dropped, and that she would have to build it up from scratch. and the girl was even afraid that his sympathy scale could drop to minus. But suddenly, her thoughts are interrupted by a strange sound coming from the window. Rowella looked around, but saw nothing and thought she was imagining things. She lay back on the bed, thinking that this was the third floor, and it would be strange to hear something here. But before Rowella could relax, she heard the sound coming from outside again and became frightened. Sitting up on the bed, she asked fearfully who was there and tried to peer into the darkness. As a result, the girl decided to go to the window to either make sure that nothing was happening there or to find the source of the sounds. She suddenly opened the window shutters and asked who was there. Rowella closed her eyes and said that if he didn't show himself, she would check it herself. But when she finally looked out the window, she didn't see anything suspicious. Rowella was surprised and thought that there really was no one here. But suddenly, she heard someone calling her name, already thinking that she was having auditory hallucinations. After that, she went out onto the balcony, looked outside, and saw a man in a black robe. Unsurprisingly, that person turned out to be Kyle. Rowella wanted to ask him how he ended up here, but Kyle put his index finger to his mouth. The girl immediately shut her mouth, realizing that she couldn't make noise now. Otherwise, someone would wake up. Kyle suddenly started waving his hand in a gesture for Rowella to move away a little. She didn't understand why, but she still did as he asked. After this, Kyle suddenly takes off and lands on Rowella's balcony. He carefully steps over the fence and lands on the floor. Rowella was impressed and asked Kyle how he did it. Kyle said that there was nothing wrong with that, because anyone who could handle magic could fly. Kyle explained that flying was practiced by great magicians, and he had simply overcome an obstacle. And Kyle decided to ask why Rowella was so surprised if she had seen this before. But Rowella brushed it off and said that she simply hadn't met someone like that in a long time. To get off topic, she asked Kyle what he was doing there in the middle of the night. Kyle came closer to the girl and said that he was worried about her. After that, he asked Rowella to remove the bandage because he wanted to look at her throat. When Rowella looked at Kyle, she saw that his sympathy had not changed 1%. She placed her hand on Kyle's face, remembering that Lewis and even Evan's sympathy had increased. Rowella thought how insensitive Kyle was and asked if he was really worried about her. Kyle told her that he was very surprised when he heard that she was wounded with a sword. That's why Kyle personally cured her, and Rowella asked if that was all. But Kyle asked in response that didn't she know about his power as the best method of healing. Kyle asks why she is looking at him like that, and Rowella sarcastically replies that she is very grateful to him. Poking the girl in the cheek with his finger, Kyle said that they had been friends for a very long time, and then asked if this was her gratitude. He started to squeeze Rowella's cheeks and asked her to show him the wound, because he was sure that everything was fine there. Rowella was mentally indignant that even though they had known each other for 10 years, he was allowing himself too much. In the Lumen Empire, people trusted the church very much. The temple escaped the oppression of the emperor, and common people and aristocrats trusted the church. Thus, the influence of the priests grew more and more every day. The position of the archbishops became increasingly stronger. One man thought that it had already been 4 years since he became the head of the church, and that at this rate, he could even become a cardinal. But the man was interrupted by someone with his sacred prophetic power. Theodore Walseton became archbishop at the age of 15 and was blessed by God. The man knew that the Pope would be appointing a cardinal next year, and he didn't want his choice to fall on that boy. He couldn't compete with that boy in divine power, and he had to take that title by any means necessary. The man ran into the room and saw that the pedestal with the jewel was empty. He looked at the empty space and couldn't believe that it was empty. But the man decided that this was his chance, because only he knows what the brilliance of the Rugonet is connected with. He kept pounding on the door and asking if there was anyone there and who was guarding that safe. One of the workers opened the door and asked what had happened. The archbishop, pointing to the safe, asks if they can't see it themselves. The man ordered that they should immediately send a message to the palace at dawn. There was a commotion, and the archbishop asked the workers to find the abuser's child. He kept shouting everywhere that the shine of Rugonet was gone, and that it was a disaster. The next day, Lewis brought Rowella to her first training session. Rowella swung at Lewis's command, trying to concentrate. Lewis asked her to relax her shoulders, hitting her on the back with his stick for swinging incorrectly. Rowella, taking the stick in her hands, tried to swing it again, but Lewis again asked her to straighten her shoulders. He hit her on the back again for her mistake, asking who was swinging a sword with their eyes closed. Rowella was already shaking when Lewis asked if she wanted to start over, but due to severe strain, the sticks fell out of the girl's hands, and she, together with them, fell to her knees on the ground, having lost all her strength. Lewis was surprised and asked if she was giving up already, but Rowella expressed that she would not give up. Showing her the correct technique again, Lewis asks Rowella to straighten her arms and keep her back straight. But when Rowella again assumed the wrong position, Lewis hit her with the sticks again. Rowella thought that all he did was hit her, while Lewis himself told her that she was standing incorrectly. Rowella thought that before, when she looked at it from the outside, everything seemed much simpler. She wanted to take the stick again, but she felt pain in her hand and screamed. Her entire palm became covered in calluses from constantly holding the stick. Finally, Lewis said that was enough for today, but Rowella shouted that it was not. She persistently proved to her brother that she could train some more. Sitting down in front of her, Lewis said that her overdoing it didn't mean she would get good results that quickly. He says that they should train according to their strengths and mentions that Rowella's body has become very weak. Rowella asked how long it would take her to become like her brother. Lewis was surprised by her question, and the girl said that she wanted to become like him as soon as possible. But Rowella expressed that she was not sure she could do it. Lewis asked what she meant when she said she couldn't do it. Rowella thought that she had been given a year to find the main character, but now she wasn't sure that she would be able to find him. Moreover, this goal is Rowella's assignment. Until now, the girl tried very hard, even when she didn't know that there were penalties for losing. But Rowella doesn't know how her efforts are different from her fatal illness in real life. Lewis said he understood that she wanted to become stronger, but relying on luck was not the path to success. He tells his sister that she sincerely asked him to be her teacher. Lewis added that if she really wanted to become a worthy person in the Clements family, she needed to develop her strength gradually. After these words, Lewis turned around and left the training ground. Rowella already wanted to cry, but she told herself that she needed to pull herself together. She thought that she herself had made the decision to live the way she should. Besides, Rowella knew that living without looking into tomorrow was better than anyone else. She decided that she would do everything in her power, as if it were her last day. At this moment, someone was hiding around the corner and secretly watching Rowella's training. When his father came to the training ground, Lewis asked him if this was allowed. Watching Rowella train, Chase asked if she could do what she wanted. He said that Rowella can't even leave the mansion, and he can't force her to do it. One way or another, it had already been 2 hours since she started training. Lewis said that Rowella has been training for a very long time and asks how it is possible to overdo it. He also said that Rowella hadn't even eaten anything, and he didn't know what they would do if she passed out again. Lewis said that this wouldn't work, and he wanted to do something, but someone distracted them. A servant runs to Lewis and his father, saying that there is an emergency. He runs and tries to say something until he gets out of breath from running so fast. When he ran up to them, he said that the archbishop and priests from the central temple had arrived at the gates of their mansion. The servant says that he heard that the luganet had lost its color, and so they wanted to check on the condition of the duchess. The father asked how they dared to come without warning, to which the servant replied that they had sent them letters several times. The father was genuinely surprised by this information, so much so that he was taken aback for a second. He was told that the letters were sent with the real seal of the emperor. The father suddenly realized that, in fact, the royal palace and the temple were in collusion. Instead of the great true sun, the empire will see the rise of a false sun, and children will cry in the sky in search of the lost light. Chase believed that the emperor would always take a neutral position. However, the fact that the archbishop brought a letter with the emperor's seal meant that he was on the side of the temple. After some thought, the father called Lewis, who responded immediately. His father told him to have Lewis take Rowella to the room and added that he should do everything to make sure that the child did not wake up. Lewis asked what he meant, and his father shouted that he would explain everything later. He ordered Rowella to be taken to her room if she passed out, and Lewis had no choice but to obey. As Lewis walked back to the training ground, he thought that even if he didn't know what had happened, he had a bad feeling. With these thoughts in mind, Lewis sped up, deciding that he needed to hurry. After some time, a tired Lewis runs to the training ground, but when he looked around carefully, he did not see Rowella anywhere. He started shouting and calling for Rowella, asking where she was, but there was deathly silence on the landing. Some time passes and Rowella opens her eyes. She woke up and wondered if her training had just been a dream. But looking at her hand, which was still covered in calluses, she realized that it was all true. Rowella clearly remembered herself training in the training ground, and she didn't understand why she was in the room. At that moment, Rowella heard someone talking next to her. She looked at the stranger, not understanding who it was, until he told her that she was not awake yet. The unknown man said that this was his first time doing it too, and he was doing it poorly. Rowella didn't have time to ask the man who he was when someone put his hand on her face. He told her that she should sleep a little longer, and under the influence of magic, the girl fell asleep. Smiling, the man told Rowella that he wished her life, because it was a gift from God. When Chase reached the gate, he asked the priests why they dared to burst in without warning. He got angry and asked if they were laughing at their family. The archbishop bowed to the duke and asked him how his health was going. The father ignored his question and asked him to explain what was going on. He warned that if they were not convincing or showed disrespect to his family, then they should not expect forgiveness. The archbishop hissed and said that Chase didn't even stand on ceremony. Handing him a letter with a seal, the archbishop says that this is a personal request from the emperor. He says that the emperor is responsible for maintaining order in the state, and therefore wants to prevent trouble in advance. The father guesses that when the archbishop speaks of trouble, he means the connection between Rowella and the oracle. The archbishop said that Chase shouldn't be so angry, because they would just check on her daughter and then leave. Evan, standing nearby, was surprised that the archbishop, on the orders of the emperor himself, came to check on Rowella. The father asks why they need to check Rowella, and the archbishop replies that they check everyone connected with the mandate of heaven first. Now that the treasure of the empire, Luganet, had lost its color, they came here in a hurry with sincere intentions. The father thought that his refusal would definitely arouse suspicion, so he told them to leave as soon as they finished checking. Chase realized that now all his hopes were only on Lewis, who was supposed to return Rowella to the room. As they walked down the hallway to the room, Evan looked around, not understanding what was happening. Turning his gaze to his father, Evan noticed that he was very tense. Evan thought that strange things started happening exactly from the day Rowella woke up. Evan didn't know how they were going to deal with all this now. At that moment, he noticed Lewis peering around the corner, his face simply gone. When he approached his father, he asked why he was there when he should be in the room with Rowella. 15 minutes ago, Lewis ran from the training ground to the palace to look for Rowella here. As Lewis ran to her room, he knew that this was the last place Rowella could be. He opened the doors, continuing to call for Rowella, and then simply froze in place from what he saw. As Lewis stood before his father and thought about what to answer, he knew very well that something had gone wrong. The father cautiously asked his son what had happened while he was trying to answer him. Lewis eventually said that Rowella was now in her room and seemed to be fast asleep. His father didn't even let him finish speaking and told Lewis that he was doing well, and then calmly walked on. Lewis didn't know the exact reasons for what happened, but he knew for sure that his father was trying to hide the fact that Rowella had woken up. Lewis remembers running into Rowella's room 15 minutes ago and seeing her on the bed. He ran up to the girl almost in a panic, and then saw that she had fallen asleep. Lewis tried to wake her up, asking what happened to her and why she was sleeping. But Lewis still couldn't figure out what level of danger Rowella was in now. He thought that this Rowella looked exactly like the one who had been sleeping for a whole year. As Evan looked at Lewis's agitated expression, he thought that something had happened between him and Rowella. The archbishop thought that at first they were shouting at him, and now they were whispering, as if they were hiding something. He looked at Evan and thought that Chase's kids were just as annoying as he was. Finally, they all reached Rowella's room and stopped in front of the closed door. Chase thought for a second, because he was afraid to open the door. The archbishop thought that his intuition was correct, that Rowella had woken up because they were all very nervous. The man decided that before they took action, he should check everything himself. Evan noticed the archbishop pushing his way through everyone. He pulls the handle and enters the room, throwing open the doors in the hope of seeing Rowella awaken. An enraged Chase shouts and asks what the archbishop is doing. The man simply walks deeper into the room and approaches the bed with Rowella lying on it. He looked at the girl suspiciously, thinking that she was just sleeping. Father says that they, too, are mistaken about this every time, and they would like to think that it is just a dream. The archbishop looked at the sleeping Rowella and could not believe that this was really so. He couldn't understand how she hadn't woken up yet and continued to sleep for so long. One way or another, the man decided to check it himself by trying to wake her up. Evan saw that the archbishop was about to do something, so he hurriedly followed into the room. Just as the archbishop was about to place his hand on Rowella's hand, Evan stopped him, grabbing his wrist. The man became indignant, looking back at Evan and asking what he was doing. Evan asked not to touch Rowella, because it was enough that the man had burst into the Duchess's bedroom without asking. In the end, the archbishop apologizes with a fake smile and says that he will not touch her again. Evan threatened the man that if he allowed himself to be so rude again, he would have to be careful. The archbishop pulled his hand out of the grip, thinking that even though Evan was young, he was good with a sword. As he brought his hand to Rowella's face, the man also thought about how strong Evan really was. When his magic didn't work, the archbishop was surprised, not understanding how this was even possible. The father asks the man how she is, pretending that Rowella really hasn't woken up yet. The man said that with that amount of mana, Rowella not only should not sleep, but she might die. The archbishop was sure that she had woken up, and he brought the emperor's seal especially for this purpose. But the man knew that Duke Clemence would not leave it all just like that. Evan asks him if he didn't hear what was happening to Rowella, but the archbishop said that there was nothing that could be done, and that he did not feel anything. Louis knew something had happened to Rowella, but he didn't understand how it could be possible if there was no reason for it to happen. Turning to his brother, a worried Louis asks what they should do now. Chase asks the archbishop how he is going to justify his behavior when he broke into his house and into Rowella's room, finding her still in a coma. The man agreed that he had caused them some inconvenience, but one way or another, it was the emperor's decree. The father lost his temper and cried out that he did not need any excuses, and he asked what would happen if the prophecy came true. And the archbishop had already completely forgotten about that boy, so he was at a loss. The father asked whether the archbishop would decide, as he had done today, to send him a letter and then show up at his gates without warning. After this, Chase says that the archbishop talked so much that he now swallowed his tongue. The archbishop bowed and said that he swears in Berger's name that such a thing will never happen again. The father threateningly told the man that there would be no second warning and asked him to get out of his house. As the archbishop left, he thought that he would never forget today's humiliation. After everyone left, Louis asked his father to call a doctor immediately because he was afraid for Rowella. Father sat down next to Rowella and asked Louis what happened when he brought her into the room. Louis admitted that he did not bring her because when he returned to the training room, there was no one there. He panics and tells how he ran all over the house and eventually found Rowella here, lying on the bed. The father became angry and asked who then brought Rowella here and who dared to touch his daughter. At that moment, Evan took out his sword and said that he would go and explore the surrounding area. After that, he immediately rushed to the exit of the room. But before Evan could leave, Louis suddenly told them that Rowella hadn't even woken up, no matter how hard he tried to wake her up. The father freezes in place, asking what he means. Louis says that she didn't react to his touches and that something went wrong. And then Chase began to think that the archbishop had been telling the truth when he had said that he felt nothing. He immediately ordered the brothers to immediately gather all the doctors of the mansion here. Evan said again that he would search every corner and come back, but he never managed to leave. When he heard sounds coming from the bed, he froze and immediately turned around. Father and Louis also froze as they looked towards the bed. They all saw that Rowella had woken up and was sitting up in bed. Louis was literally speechless, trying to say something. Rowella smiled sweetly at everyone and asked why they were there, since it was almost lunchtime. And the girl wondered what she was doing here, because she had just been at training. As his father runs to her bed, Evan stutters as he asks how she woke up and what happened. Chase rushed to his daughter and immediately hugged her tightly, and Rowella was surprised. The father said he thought he had lost her again, and while he was hugging her, Rowella quietly asked her brothers what happened. She asks what happened, and Louis, with tears in his eyes, says that she is fine. Louis started to cry, saying what a joy it was, and Evan just hung his head, sighing. The father also said that it was a blessing that she had woken up, and he smiled sincerely at his daughter. The next moment, Theodore watched the stone go out in the safe. As he looked at it, he realized that Rowella had been able to wake up easily. Theodore knows that everything will start again as soon as the light of life comes on. The archbishop decided that the light of life was the light of the Luganet, and Theodore felt it. A year ago, when Rowella fell asleep, the Luganet began to shine again. At that moment, the Roman Empire became like a dead city. Recently, the empire has regained some of its vitality, and time has begun to flow as usual. As soon as Rowella woke up, everything fell into place. Theodore seemed to be waiting for the Luganet to lose its light again. And he was right, because the light of life belongs to Rowella, and she is that very child. If the archbishop visited the mansion with the emperor's request, then the ruler was also involved in this. But Theodore knew that Rowella still had no strength. The man also understands that Rowella herself does not yet know who she really is. But, one way or another, Theodore decided that he could wait a little. A priest approached Theodore to tell him about the light of the Luganet. But Theodore smiled and told him that the stone was fine, and he didn't have to worry. O told the priest that they should greet Archbishop Berger, and that it was time to return. Theodore, however, mentally hoped that it would be Rowella who would become the light of the empire. Already at lunch, Rowella thought about the guy she saw before she passed out. She remembers how that guy grabbed her while she was training, and then, when she was lying in bed, he paralyzed her with magic. And either by magic or by divine power, he made her body no different from a corpse. But Rowella was lucky that her stat levels remained the same and did not change. When Rowella remembered that the guy had wished for her life, she didn't think that he had intended to harm or kill her. And while the girl was thinking about this in her head, her father told her that she would soon have to report that she had woken up. He continued and said that they should not hide this fact from the church for so long. Chase also explained that the main thing is that it has been proven that Rowella has nothing to do with the disappearance of the light of Luganet. Eventually, the father said that there would be an official announcement soon and asked Rowella to prepare for it. After these words, Rowella looked at her brothers, surprised that they looked too tense, and while the girl was eating a delicious steak, she wondered why the atmosphere here was so gloomy. But, after thinking about it, Rowella suddenly asked that now it turned out that she could go outside. Her father confirmed this and said that they would soon have a small banquet, and she needed to wait. Rowella was mentally glad that now it would be even easier to find the main character. But if you think about it, that guy was emitting a strong divine energy, which made Rella think that he was from the temple. Rowella had already realized that her father was hiding something from her, but she became convinced that the temple was a danger to her. Either way, that man helped Rowella, and he is the only person from the church who is on her side. These thoughts prompted Rowella to ask her father a question that unexpectedly interested her. She asked her father with a smile if she could meet with the priest. Louis choked heavily on these words and spat out the contents of his mouth in shock. Immediately after Rowella's question, everyone became gloomy and embarrassed, looking away. Rowella wondered why everyone had suddenly become quiet, as if wanting to get away from the topic. But the moment she looked at her dad, she saw red manna radiating from him. The system notified Rowella that Louis's sympathy towards her had dropped by 4%, and the system also reported Evan's likability, which dropped by 2%. Already closer to evening, when it was pouring rain outside, the emperor was sitting in his office and wiping his sword. Hearing a knock at the door, the emperor allowed the newcomer to enter. The man asks the archbishop if he was able to find out anything. The archbishop removed his hood and, stuttering, replied that he himself did not understand it. The emperor said that the connection between the divine Luganet and Clemence's daughter was obvious, but he needed to know one thing. The emperor, turning to the archbishop, spoke about the day when this child was born. He said that he checked the documents at the orphanage and found out that the child was born long before his coronation. The man explained that there, in the orphanage, the children's real dates of birth were written in the documents. The archbishop says that the days when the child was transferred, there are recorded there, and the exact date of birth is unknown. The emperor begins to get angry, while the archbishop dares to consider that the child is a child of the Luganet if the exact date of birth is unknown. But the archbishop, in alarm, began to deny this and said that he did not think so in any way. He explained to the emperor that he had seen everything with his own eyes that day. 20 years ago, on Orphan Day, the archbishop accompanied the children to the temple and brought them to the central building. At that time, the archbishop was just a priest, and he was responsible for all the children. And then he saw that child. There was no divine healing or magical power, and only one child in the empire could emit such light. After he told his story, The emperor decides to ask him what he saw in that room. The archbishop says that 12 years ago, when the prophecy came true, Luganet lost its light. And at the moment when this happened, that girl was in that room with the stone. The archbishop explains that he saw with his own eyes the connection between that child and the light of Luganet. And after that, after some time, that girl was adopted by Duke Chase Clemens. For now, the archbishop didn't want to make Chase his enemy, so he kept his mouth shut. The archbishop wondered if Chase would take revenge on him by converting the emperor to his side. He ends up telling the emperor that he doesn't know what they did to that child, but he's sure she's connected to the light of the Luganet. The archbishop asks His Majesty to trust him and take a closer look at Chase's daughter. Since the founding of the empire, the temple and the rulers of the country were in constant conflict. On the day when a false sun rises over the empire, separate from the great sun, the Luganet will lose its light and the cry of a child will be heard throughout the world. Emperor Arnold got rid of the stigma of the false sun and destroyed the great sun of the empire, and in order to preserve the temple's reputation, the light of the Luganet shone again. Then, for the first time since the country's founding, the temple and the emperor united against the daughter of Duke Clemence. After some time, the maids ask Rowella if what happened at dinner really upset her. They assure the girl that the Duke and his brothers take great care of her, but Rowella still sulked, saying that even if that were the case, she didn't have to be forbidden to leave the house. Rowella cried out in displeasure, not understanding why they did this to her. Rowella was outraged that she had simply asked that question, which had ruined everything. At dinner, Rowella's father told her that he would think about her leaving the mansion. He says he forgot again about her memory loss, but Rowella asks how much longer she will have to sit here. Evan snorted at her and said that she really was crazy. Louis confirmed his words and told his father that Rowella was still too naive. Evan says that there is no hint of good manners in Rowella and that how can she be so immodest at her age? Rowella cried out indignantly that she had simply asked about it, to which all three of them said in unison that they did not ask about such things. Rowella still couldn't understand why they all reacted so sharply to her question. She didn't even tell them that she was seriously planning to date a priest. However, Rowella was already starting to get worried and angry because she needed to find the main character as soon as possible. After some time, Rowella returned to the training ground with Louis. Louis reminds her to treat the ball as if it were herself and asks if she would throw herself like that. But Rowella says the stick just slipped out of her hand. Noticing that the girl is straining her shoulders again, Louis asks her to try again. Louis was surprised that Rowella was still holding on, wondering if she had always been so physically fit. He continued to yell at his sister for making mistakes, while Rowella thought about all he kept shouting out her name. Meanwhile, the other knights who were training on the field watched Rowella and noticed how hard she was working. They decided to support Rowella and started shouting at her that she was great and that she would succeed. Louis looked at them and became angry and realized that training like this would not work. Rowella asked what was wrong, but Louis got furious and asked if she really wanted to go back to the training hall again. The knights looked at Rowella with pity, saying that Louis was angry and they felt sorry for the girl. Louis yelled at them too, asking if they wanted him to teach them again or if they wanted to roll around on the floor. While they were sorting things out, Rowella decided to make another test swing. But suddenly, Rowella accidentally stumbled and began to fall, which Louis noticed. He immediately ran towards her in a panic to catch her, but Rowella was able to wriggle free and get to her feet. She learned a new technique, thinking that her strength had increased and that the training was now definitely worth it. Louis had already run up to her by this point, but he stopped abruptly, and Rowella asked what was the matter. Louis shamefully covered his face with his hand and replied that it was nothing anymore. He wondered how long Rowella had been training, because he thought that once she started, she would immediately give up. Louis thought that all this time he hadn't really understood her, because he was ready to admit that Rowella wasn't so bad. Eventually, Louis turned around and said that that was enough for today, and that it was time for them to eat. As he was leaving, Rowella noticed his sympathy meter and saw that it had risen. Louis asked if she was coming or not, and Rowella caught up with him with a smile. It's evening, and Rowella is lying on her bed in her room, drawing something in her notebook. She gave her name to check her statistics and noticed that her abilities were gradually increasing. And suddenly, the girl wondered what class the main male character might belong to. She wondered if it might be a wizard, but that wouldn't help her in her search. And while she was drawing in her notebook, She thought that she should also take a couple of drawing lessons. Recently, Rowella has been studying the geography of the Ruman Empire. Rumanzi Street, which is the center of the system, is called the heart of the Ruman Empire. The Clemens family's Lake Hyben is used for the production of etheric stones. But Rowella wondered again how she could find the main character when she was locked at home and the empire was so huge. But the girl immediately tried to calm herself with the words that she would definitely find him. She decided clearly and distinctly for herself that this time she would not die so easily. And while she was drowning in her own thoughts, Kyle snuck into her room. Coming closer to the girl, Kyle became wary and asked what was wrong with her mood when he saw her face. Rowella wondered if this was the first time she had seen such unwavering interest, and Kyle asked if she needed any treatment. Kyle asked why Rowella was looking at him like that, joking that he had charmed her. Rowella asked why he came at all, and said that if he didn't have anything important to do, then he should leave. Kyle thought that the training was really hard. That's why Rowella was so angry, and he wanted to help her by healing her. Rowella screamed that Kyle was acting the way he wanted again, but he explained that if he healed her, the pain would go away. Rowella asked if he didn't know that the more a person's body endures, the stronger he becomes. The girl mentally recalled how in their 21st century of enlightenment, they talked about this on YouTube. Kyle said that she was very stubborn and added that he brought her a surprise and she was being so rude to him. He handed her his surprise, and it turned out to be candies, which Rowella was surprised by and asked where they came from. Kyle said he bought them on the main street, and then clarified that Rowella had always liked these candies. Rowella told him again that he was a pervert, and he was surprised, not understanding why she was saying this. Rowella explained that Kyle needed to be careful, because if he acted so nicely with girls, they might misunderstand him. She says that there are indeed a lot of women on the street, and Kyle doesn't have to worry about sneaking up on her at night without anyone noticing. And after that, the girl thanked Kyle for the sweets, saying that she would eat them one at a time. Kyle suddenly grabs Rowella's hand as she unwraps the bag of candy. He looked into her eyes and asked where all this nonsense came from in her head. Kyle told Rowella that she knew she was the only one he treated so kindly. Rowella wondered why Kyle kept repeating this if his sympathy level didn't change. Even after such sincere words, the guy's sympathy scale did not change, and this surprised her. Kyle, calling her Candy, told her not to worry and to eat everything calmly. Rowella said it was all candy, but Kyle was indignant and asked what candy had to do with it. Rowella asked him again if he really bought the candy on Roo, and Kyle confirmed it. When mentioning his magic, Rowella says that he can overcome obstacles, and then the girl asks Kyle how far he can go. Eventually, Kyle picked up Rowella and went outside with her using magic. Rowella was happy when she found herself in the sky because it was her first time. After that, Kyle landed carefully and put Rowella on the ground. Rowella told Kyle how cool he was, to which he responded that he wasn't sure if what they were doing was right. He meant that they would be in trouble if Duke Chase saw them. Rowella reminded him that Kyle had never been caught coming to her, so everything would be fine. But if he is caught, he will face a severe punishment. After these words, Rowella ran with a smile towards the forest, from where there is an exit to the city. When Rowella came to the forest, she was surprised to notice a horse standing on the road. Kyle explained that to get to the main horse, they would need to ride the horse for about 15 minutes. Kyle said that if Rowella didn't come back, he would take her himself, but she said that she didn't want to, and that they would go on horseback. The girl saw Kyle smiling sweetly back at her after her words. She didn't understand why he reacted that way, because she had only told him that she was going to ride a horse. After this, Kyle picks up Rowella and lifts her into the air, causing the girl to scream in surprise. Rowella shook and asked why she was so high on the horse, and Kyle looked at her in surprise. Kyle reassured her and told her that everything was okay now, and that she needed to straighten up now. As the horse walked slowly along the trail, Kyle asked if everything was okay. He warned Rowella that if she didn't hold on to him, she would fall. And after that, the horse quickly ran forward, its hooves flashing. Rowella closed her eyes in fear, clutching the cart tightly with her hands. It was only after some time, when the horse slowed down, that Rowella dared to open her eyes. She looked up at the sky, which was completely different from the one on the grounds of their mansion. Rowella said how beautiful the sky was, and that it looked like it was in the palm of her hand. She happily said that she never thought she would ride a horse, and that she really enjoyed it. Kyle only smiled tenderly at her words, pleased that Rowella was happy. After 15 minutes, the horse stops. They have arrived at the right place. Kyle asked Rowella to be careful when descending, but she decided to simply jump off her horse. Rowella immediately rushed forward, wanting to get to the main street as soon as possible, but Kyle ran after her. He immediately caught up with her and asked her to listen to him while Rowella asked why she couldn't go. Kyle said that whoever he was still afraid of Duke Clements, and he couldn't let him know where he had taken Rowella. Rowella was surprised when Kyle said he was afraid, but Rowella assured him that they wouldn't get caught. The girl asked Kyle in a drawn-out tone to trust only her, and everything would be fine. But after that, her face became serious, and Kyle said that no matter what happened, no one should catch her. While Kyle was adjusting her hood, he said that they would now look around a bit and then go back. Rowella agreed with him easily, and Kyle wondered if she had understood him correctly. But after that, the guy extended his hand to the girl so that they could finally go to the main street. When they found themselves on this street, Rowella looked around with interest and admiration. The girl realized that this street was the very heart of the empire, its center. It was the best place where everything was sold, and which gathered all the citizens of the empire. Kyle tells Rowella that before she lost her memory, they used to come here very often. But suddenly, Kyle thought that he was explaining it as if they had come here for the first time. He realized that he was being haunted by some strange mood. Kyle remembers and realizes that he and Rowella have been through so much together, but she has forgotten everything. Noticing a flag hanging on a pole, Rowella recognizes on it the symbolism of Meltonier's teachings. Once Isabella told her that now the influence of the temple is quite weak, but during the Confederation, the power of the Pope was enormous. Isabella explains that it looked like a flying dragon on a cross, but some people believed that what was actually depicted here was the execution of the dragon. As Rowella looked at the sign, she remembered that this was exactly what Isabella was talking about. She knew that many houses had this sign hanging on them as a symbol of faith in Meltonier. Rowella once asked the teacher that since it was not suppressed so actively, then in terms of faith, people must be free. Isabella said that ultimately, each person's faith belongs to them. After the founding of the empire, many people were hostile to the ruling family of Rumanzia. Suddenly, Rowella decided to ask Kyle if nobles didn't come here, and he said that now is the time of commoners. Kyle says that next time they should come here during the day, when everything is normal. However, he nevertheless noted that this street is best admired at night. Rowella said it was great, and they just arrived here at night. Kyle said that perhaps the nobles come here at night too, the ones who are too curious. Rowella suddenly rushed forward and told Kyle that she would be more careful. Kyle laughed at her and yelled at her to slow down so much. Rowella shouted back that they would see each other in an hour in front of the main gates to the city, and disappeared into the crowd. Rowella felt sorry for Kyle, but that was her original plan. Since she couldn't sit in the mansion and waste time, she needed to find the main hero quickly. At that moment, Rowella noticed one guy among the crowd, thinking that he was her new candidate. As Rowella wandered down the main street, she wondered if the system would give her a new mission. The girl thought that there were a lot of people here, and it was difficult for her to even move. At that moment, Rowella accidentally bumped shoulders with a passing man. She started to fall, but at that moment, she suddenly found herself in someone's arms. Rowella was caught by some unknown guy, who was also wearing a black robe like her. The girl was about to thank the stranger for saving her, but he immediately let her go and retreated. Before she could say a word, the guy walked ahead and disappeared into the passing crowd. Rowella wondered why he just left without telling her. But suddenly, Rowella smelled a nutmeg aroma and froze for a second. The thought came to mind that it was that guy who smelled of this wonderful aroma. The girl thought that if she ran into him again, she would definitely have to get to know him. After some time, Rowella found herself on the other side of the main street. This was Vincent's main square, which Rowella had only heard about before. She looked at everything around her with shining eyes, full of interest and delight. Rowella was only convinced that this square was simply incredible. Looking down into the fountain, Rowella was surprised to see how many coins were lying there. She thought that there was probably a tradition here, too, of throwing a coin into the water and making a wish. But while Rowella was thinking about everything and nothing, the hood accidentally fell off her head. She immediately remembered how Kyle had told her that she must not be recognized here under any circumstances. And at that moment, the girl noticed someone looking at her from afar, on the other side of the fountain. That guy was actually looking straight at Rowella, and she could see it perfectly well. This feeling made her feel uneasy and even scared. And then the system suddenly notified her that it was time for a new mission. Rowella was told to find a man in a black cloak with silver eyes. The time limit was 30 minutes, and she could receive a fine for breaking the mission. Rowella realized that the guy looking at her was the one she needed. She glanced at him again, and when she was sure it was definitely him, she took off. Rowella ran after that guy for a long time, turning onto other streets. When there were only 16 minutes left, Rowella stopped because she was tired. The disgruntled girl started yelling at the system that if she had told about the Missy earlier, she could have grabbed that guy even earlier. The system ignores her and says that it has no extra time, so Rowella needs to hurry. Rowella sighed and decided to continue looking for that guy. At that moment, knights were walking around, and one of them said that he wanted to sleep. Deciding to eavesdrop on their conversation, Rowella heard them talking about some kind of magical tower. One of the knights says that the Lord only walks on the territory of the tower, and the second asked if he believed these rumors. They discuss how the Lord never showed up at events, and they don't recognize him. One day, Rowella asked if the power of the magic tower and the temple were the same, to which Isabella replied that they were. She says that if the temple takes power from the inhabitants, then the power of the magic tower is drawn from the fear of the inhabitants. Since the establishment of the empire, the Lord of the tower has never changed. Isabella said that although no one has seen his face, those who work in the tower say that the Lord has an immortal body. Since the Lord neither ages nor dies, he lives in fear, fearing everyone. To live long and not die also means to be strong to such an extent that no one can harm you. Isabella said that this was all taking into account the fact that the Lord was guarding the tower. And suddenly, Rowella thought that the Lord of the Magic Tower was the ideal candidate for the role of the main character. While the knights were discussing his appearance, one of them said that he didn't care anymore and wanted to go home to bed as soon as possible. Rowella realized that the people who walked around here in robes were nobles. She accidentally made some sound that caused the knights to be distracted from their conversation. The knight walked towards where Rowella was hiding, and she was afraid that right now she would be finished. But suddenly, someone comes up to her from behind and abruptly covers her mouth so that she does not make a single sound. It turned out to be the same guy she was chasing, but Rowella didn't realize it because she didn't see him. Rowella tried to break free, not understanding what had happened and why he couldn't let her go. And suddenly, the girl smelled that same nutmeg scent that she had caught on the street before. A strange guy suddenly raises his hand and snaps his fingers. All this time, the knight walking towards them turned around abruptly, under the pretext that he had misheard something. As a result, the knights in the courtyard calmly moved on, continuing to talk about their own topics. When the knights leave, the boy finally removes his hand from Rowella's face and asks her who she is. Rowella decided to turn around to see who was there before answering. And finally, she recognized the guy as the one who had caught her on the main street, the one with whom she had crossed eyes on Vincent Street. But since he was a new candidate for the lead role, Rowella was surprised when she noticed that he didn't have a sympathy scale. And while Rowella was confused, the guy asked her if she was going to answer him. Rowella gave him a fake smile and said that she mistook him for someone else, so she had to go. But the stranger suddenly grabbed her by the cloak and asked why she was running away from him. Rowella was about to tell him the truth, but suddenly changed her mind. She pulled away from his grip and repeated that she had, in fact, been mistaken. When the girl was about to run away, she suddenly stumbled. As she fell, she reached out to the boy to help her avoid hitting the ground. Rowella understood that if this continued, her head would simply break when she fell. But still, the unfamiliar guy manages to catch her and grab her in his strong arms.